On the morning of their 6th wedding anniversary, Sarah Davis walked into their bedroom and found her husband packing a suitcase. Not for a romantic getaway. Not for a business trip. He was leaving. For good. And when she asked him why, after 6 years of what she thought was a solid marriage, he looked at her with eyes that had gone cold and said something that would haunt her forever. "I never loved you, Sarah. I married you to prove I could." In that moment, everything she thought she knew about her life shattered like glass hitting concrete. But here's what makes this story different. What makes it stay with you long after you hear it. Because while Sarah stood there, frozen in disbelief, she realized something he didn't know. Something she had been carrying silently for 3 years, and it meant he wasn't the one in control anymore. This is a true story that unfolded in Portland, Oregon, between 2016 and 2022. The names have been changed, but every detail, every emotion, every devastating moment is real. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, to understand how a marriage can be built on a lie so complete, so carefully constructed that it fooled everyone including the bride herself, we need to go back to where it all started. Back to 2015, when Sarah Davis was 34 years old, working as a high school English teacher in suburban Portland, living a quiet, predictable life. She had been single for 3 years after a difficult breakup, and honestly, she was okay with it. She had her students, her small apartment filled with books, her weekend hiking trips with friends. She wasn't looking for love. She wasn't even looking for companionship. But that's usually when it finds you, isn't it? David Thompson was 41 when they met at a mutual friend's barbecue in July 2015. He was a financial analyst, well-dressed, articulate, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of professional success. He wasn't flashy, but he had presence. The kind of man who listens when you talk, who asks follow-up questions, who makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. David was charming, attentive, interested. He asked about her work, about her students, about what made her choose teaching. He shared stories about his childhood in Seattle, his parents who had immigrated from Taiwan and worked relentlessly to give him opportunities. Everything felt genuine. Everything felt right. Over the next few months, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Dinner dates twice a week, weekend trips to the coast, quiet evenings watching movies. David met her friends and they liked him. By December, 6 months into their relationship, Sarah had started to imagine a future with this man. David seemed to feel the same way. He talked about the future casually but consistently. "When we go to Europe next summer," he'd say. Or, "when we get a place together with more space." These small mentions of a shared future made Sarah's heart swell with possibility. But there was something she didn't know. Something David had never told her. Something that was happening in parallel to their seemingly perfect romance. David had an ex-girlfriend named Rebecca. They had dated for 4 years, from 2009 to 2013, and by all accounts, David had been deeply in love with her. He had talked about marriage, bought a ring, planned to propose. But Rebecca had other ideas. She worked in tech, was ambitious, driven, and when she got a job offer in San Francisco with a salary that dwarfed what David was making, she took it. Without him. Rebecca had broken up with David over dinner at the same Italian restaurant where he would later take Sarah on their first date. She told him she loved him but wasn't ready to settle down. That she needed to focus on her career. That marriage felt like something that would hold her back. David had been devastated. Not just heartbroken, but humiliated. Because a week after their breakup, he found out through mutual friends that Rebecca had started dating someone new in San Francisco. A venture capitalist. Someone wealthy, successful, powerful. And that's when something shifted inside David. The hurt transformed into something harder. Something colder. Resentment. For 2 years after Rebecca left, David threw himself into work. He dated casually but never seriously. He built his career, his savings, his professional reputation. But internally, he was nursing a wound that wouldn't heal. And then, in early 2015, something happened that reignited everything. Rebecca moved back to Portland. She had broken up with the venture capitalist, and she reached out to David. Not to get back together, but to see if they could be friends. They met for coffee in March 2015, 4 months before David would meet Sarah. Rebecca looked the same. Successful, confident, beautiful. She talked about her career, her travels, her plans. And when David mentioned he was single, Rebecca said something that would echo in his mind for months. She said, "You should find someone stable, David. Someone who appreciates what you have to offer. You deserve that." It was meant kindly. Rebecca had no malicious intent, she genuinely wished him well. But David heard something else. He heard pity. He heard condescension. He heard the unspoken subtext that he was predictable, safe, boring. Not exciting enough for someone like her. And that's when David made a decision. A quiet, calculated decision that he never spoke aloud. He decided he would find someone. Someone good, someone kind, someone who would be the perfect partner. And he would marry her. Not because he loved her, but because he needed to prove something to Rebecca. This wasn't Rebecca's doing. This was David's wound talking. His choice. His plan. When David met Sarah 4 months later at that barbecue, he saw exactly what he was looking for. Sarah was attractive, intelligent, kind, stable. She was a teacher, which meant she was nurturing and patient. She had been single for a while, which meant she wouldn't have impossibly high standards. She was genuine, which meant she would believe in the relationship. She was perfect. Not for love, but for his purposes. David proposed to Sarah in August 2016, 13 months after they started dating. They were on a weekend trip to Cannon Beach, watching the sunset at Haystack Rock. It was beautiful, romantic, exactly the kind of proposal Sarah had quietly dreamed about. David got down on one knee, told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and asked her to marry him. Sarah said yes through happy tears. The wedding was planned for June 2017. Sarah threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm and care. She wanted everything to be meaningful, personal, reflective of who they were as a couple. David participated in the planning, but in a detached way. He agreed to most of Sarah's suggestions, said yes to the venue she loved, the menu she preferred, the music she wanted. To Sarah, this felt like trust and partnership. She thought he was being supportive, letting her create the wedding of her dreams. But in reality, David didn't care about the details because the wedding wasn't about love for him. It was about the performance. About showing Rebecca, who he knew would hear about it through mutual friends, that he had moved on. The wedding day in June 2017 was beautiful. 75 guests gathered at a vineyard outside Portland. The weather was perfect, warm and sunny with a gentle breeze. Sarah wore a simple, elegant dress and walked down the aisle to a string quartet. When David saw her approaching, he smiled. But if you had looked closely, really closely, you would have seen that the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. They honeymooned in Hawaii for 10 days, staying at a resort on Maui. Sarah had been looking forward to this trip for months, imagining long walks on the beach, romantic dinners, making love as newlyweds, starting their married life in paradise. But something felt off almost immediately. David was present physically but absent emotionally. He was polite, accommodating, but distant. When Sarah reached for his hand, he held it, but it felt perfunctory. When she suggested they watch the sunset together, he agreed, but spent most of the time checking his phone. Sarah tried to brush it off. She told herself he was tired from the wedding, stressed from work, adjusting to married life. She told herself it would get better once they got home and settled into their routine. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, she felt something was wrong. When they returned to Portland, they moved into a 2-bedroom house they had rented together. David seemed more interested in maintaining separation than creating unity. He kept his belongings in the 2nd bedroom, which he designated as his office. He maintained his own schedule, often working late, or going to the gym without checking if Sarah wanted to join him. Sarah tried to talk to him about it 3 months into their marriage. They were sitting on the couch one evening, and she gently said, "David, I feel like we're roommates more than newlyweds. Is everything okay?" David looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read and said, "Everything's fine, Sarah. I'm just adjusting to married life." It takes time. She believed him. Because what else could she do? He was her husband. She had vowed to love him through better and worse. So she decided to be patient, to give him space, to trust that things would improve. But things didn't improve. Over the next year, the distance between them grew wider. What Sarah didn't know then was that the coldness she felt on that beach in Maui wasn't temporary. It was the first honest moment of their marriage. What Sarah didn't know was that David had already gotten what he wanted from the marriage. The validation. The proof that he could commit, that someone would choose him, that he was worthy of marriage even if Rebecca hadn't thought so. 6 weeks after the wedding, Rebecca reached out to David via text. She congratulated him, said she was happy for him, asked if they could meet for coffee to catch up. David agreed. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland in August 2017, 2 months after his wedding. Rebecca looked at him differently now. With respect. Maybe even with a hint of regret. She asked about Sarah, about married life, about his plans for the future. David played his role perfectly. He spoke about Sarah with warmth, about how happy he was, about how marriage had changed his perspective on life. And as he sat there, watching Rebecca's reactions, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Victory. And in that moment, sitting across from the woman who had once rejected him, David realized something terrifying. The marriage had already served its purpose. But victory is a strange thing. It's satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't sustain you. And once David had proven his point, once Rebecca had seen that he had moved on and found happiness, he didn't know what to do next. So he did what many people do when they don't know what else to do. He went through the motions. By their second anniversary in June 2019, Sarah had started to accept that this was what her marriage would be. A partnership in name only. Then, in September 2019, something happened that would change everything. Sarah was cleaning out their bedroom closet when she found a box on the top shelf of David's side. When she pulled it down, something fell out. A photograph. Sarah picked it up and saw a woman she didn't recognize. Beautiful, confident, smiling at the camera. On the back, in handwriting she didn't recognize, was written, David and Rebecca, Summer 2012. Sarah opened the box fully and found more photographs. David and Rebecca at the beach. At restaurants. At parties. All dated from 2009 to 2013. There were also cards, letters, small mementos. Evidence of a relationship that had clearly been significant. If this story already has your heart racing, comment. I'm still watching. Because what comes next changes everything. That evening, when David came home from work, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with the box in front of her. David saw it immediately, and something flickered across his face. Not quite fear, but something close to it. I found this in the closet, Sarah said quietly. Who is Rebecca? David was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down across from her. Someone I dated a long time ago, he said. Before you. For 4 years, Sarah said, gesturing to the photographs. This wasn't just dating, David. This was a relationship. A serious one. Why didn't you ever tell me about her? David rubbed his face, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as him buying time to think. Because it was over, he finally said. Because I didn't see the point in bringing up something that was in the past. That's not honest, David, Sarah said, and she could feel tears starting to form. You hid her. Completely. Like she never existed. Why? David stood up and walked to the window, his back to Sarah. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. Because I didn't want to talk about her. Because that relationship hurt me in ways I wasn't ready to discuss. I want the truth, Sarah said. I want to understand why my husband kept a significant part of his life completely hidden from me. David turned around, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Coldness. You want the truth? He said, and his voice had an edge to it. Fine. Rebecca left me. She chose her career over me. She made me feel like I wasn't enough. And then she moved on immediately to someone richer, more successful. Does that satisfy your curiosity? Sarah felt the words like physical blows. David, I'm sorry that happened to you. But I'm your wife. You should have told me. Why? David asked, and the coldness in his voice intensified. So you could feel sorry for me? So you could know that I was the guy who wasn't good enough? It's not pity, Sarah said, standing up. It's understanding. It's intimacy. It's what marriage is supposed to be. David laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. You want to know about intimacy in our marriage, Sarah? You really want to go there? Sarah felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? David looked at her, and in that moment Sarah saw the truth before he even spoke it. She saw it in his eyes, in the way his expression had hardened, in the way he had positioned himself across the room from her like they were adversaries rather than partners. It means, David said slowly, that I married you to prove a point. To prove that I could move on. To prove that I was desirable and worthy and capable of commitment. And you were perfect for that purpose, Sarah. You were kind and trusting and you believed in me. But love? No. I never loved you. I'm sorry, but I didn't. The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back, impossible to unhear. Sarah felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She didn't cry. Not immediately. She stood there, staring at the man she had married, trying to process what he had just said. You never loved me, she repeated, her voice hollow. No, David said, and he had the decency to look away. But you proposed to me, Sarah said. You married me. You stood in front of 75 people and made vows. I know, David said. And I kept those vows, Sarah. I've been faithful, responsible, present. Present? Sarah's voice rose. You've been absent since our honeymoon, David. You've been cold and distant. I blamed myself. I thought I was doing something wrong. But it wasn't me, was it? It was you. It was always you. David turned back to face her, and now he looked tired. I'm sorry, Sarah. I truly am. You didn't deserve this. Then why? Sarah asked, and now the tears came. Why did you do this? Because I needed to prove that Rebecca was wrong about me, David said quietly. Because I needed to show her and everyone else that I could have a successful relationship. And when we got married, when I saw Rebecca's reaction, I felt vindicated. But then I didn't know what came next. Sarah wiped her eyes, trying to regain some composure. So what now? You've told me the truth. What are you expecting to happen? David was quiet for a moment. I think we should get divorced. I'll make it easy for you. We can say we grew apart, irreconcilable differences, whatever you want. I'll be fair with the financial arrangements. But I can't keep doing this, Sarah. I can't keep pretending. Sarah felt something shift inside her. The shock was starting to fade, replaced by something harder. Something clearer. You can't keep pretending? She said, and there was steel in her voice now. David, you've been pretending since the day you met me. You've lied to me, used me, manipulated me into a marriage that was never real. And now you want to make it easy? Now you want to be fair? Sarah, David started, but she cut him off. No. You don't get to do this. You don't get to blow up my life and then dictate how we clean up the mess. You want a divorce? Fine. But we're doing this my way, not yours. You're going to leave. Tonight. You're going to pack a bag and go stay somewhere else. And then we're going to figure this out with lawyers and mediators and proper legal channels. David did leave that night. Sarah was left alone in the house they had shared, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage that had never been real. She called her best friend Jennifer, who came over immediately. Over the next few days, Sarah began the process of untangling her life from David's. She consulted with a divorce attorney, started gathering financial documents, began the painful work of telling her family and friends what had happened. A week after David left, Sarah was going through paperwork when she found something that made her stop cold. It was a document from 3 years earlier, from early in their marriage. Sarah had been diagnosed with a minor health condition, nothing life-threatening, but something that required ongoing monitoring. David had told her not to worry about the medical costs, that his insurance would cover everything. But now, looking at the document in her hands, Sarah realized something that made her breath catch. David had set up a health savings account for her. Not a shared account, but one specifically in her name. He had been depositing money into it every month for 3 years. Enough to cover not just her current needs, but years of future care. Sarah stared at the document for a long time. She didn't move. Didn't cry. Just sat there, trying to reconcile what she was holding with everything she thought she knew. Why would David do this? If he didn't love her, if the marriage was just a strategy, why would he take care of her financially in such a thoughtful, long-term way? This wasn't autopilot. This wasn't obligation. This was someone thinking about her future. Her health. Her security. Her. The contradiction didn't make sense. And Sarah needed it to make sense. She called David and asked if they could meet to talk. They met at a park near their house on a cool October afternoon. David looked tired, thinner than he had been a week ago, with dark circles under his eyes. They sat on a bench, maintaining a careful distance between them. "I found the health savings account," Sarah said. David nodded slowly. "I figured you would eventually." "Why did you do it?" Sarah asked. "If you never loved me, why would you set that up? Why would you take care of me that way?" David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Because you deserve to be taken care of. Because even though I couldn't give you love, I could give you security. I could make sure you were protected." "That doesn't make sense, David," Sarah said. "You can't say you never loved me and then show me evidence that you cared." David turned to look at her, and Sarah saw vulnerability in his eyes. "You want the whole truth?" he said. "I married you to prove a point to Rebecca. That part is true. But Sarah, here's what I didn't anticipate. I didn't anticipate that you would be genuinely kind. That you would try so hard to make the marriage work. That you would be patient with my distance and keep showing up with love even when I couldn't return it. And somewhere along the way, even though I couldn't love you the way you deserved, I started to care about you. Not in the way a husband should care about a wife, but in the way you care about someone who has shown you grace you didn't deserve." Sarah felt tears welling up. "Then why were you so cold? Why did you pull away instead of trying to make it real?" "Because I was afraid," David admitted. "Afraid that if I let myself feel too much, if I let myself get close, I would get hurt again the way Rebecca hurt me. So I kept my distance. I told myself I was protecting myself, but really, I was just being a coward. And you paid the price for my cowardice." They sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you still want the divorce?" David looked surprised. "Do you?" Sarah considered this carefully. "I don't know. Part of me wants to run as far away from you as possible. But another part of me wonders if maybe, with therapy and time and work, we could build something real. Not based on lies or strategy, but based on honesty and effort and genuine care." David shook his head slowly. "Sarah, you're being too generous. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who loves you fully, without reservation, without fear." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But David, here's what you need to understand. I'm not the same person who found those photographs a week ago. I've changed. And part of that change is realizing that I get to decide what I want, and what I'm willing to work for. Not you. Not your guilt. Not your ideas about what I deserve. Me." David looked at her with something like amazement. "When did you get so strong?" "I was always strong," Sarah said. "You just never bothered to look closely enough to see it." Over the next 3 months, Sarah and David existed in a strange limbo. They were legally married but living separately. They saw a couples therapist once a week. David started seeing an individual therapist as well, working on the trauma from his relationship with Rebecca and his patterns of emotional avoidance. In January 2020, 4 months after David's confession, Sarah made a decision. She asked David to meet her at a coffee shop. When David arrived, Sarah was already there. He sat down across from her, anxiety clear on his face. He thought she was going to ask for a divorce. Instead, Sarah said something he never expected. "I want to try again. But not the way we were before. I want us to start completely over." David looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah said, "that I want you to move back into the guest room, not our bedroom. I want us to date each other, like we should have dated before we got married. I want us to have conversations, to learn about each other, to build trust slowly and carefully." And if, after 6 months, we both feel like we want to stay married, then we stay married. But if either one of us feels like it's not working, we separate with no guilt." David stared at her. "Sarah, why would you give me another chance?" "Because I believe people can change. I believe you've started to do the work. And I believe that what we had wasn't completely false. There were real moments too. Real conversations. Real care, even if it wasn't love. And I think there might be something worth saving if we're both willing to be honest and vulnerable." "Are you sure?" David asked. "Because I might never be the person you thought you married." "I'm not looking for the person I thought you were," Sarah said. "I'm looking for the person you actually are, flaws and fears and all. The question is, are you willing to let me see that person?" David was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up at Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes that he hadn't seen before. Genuine emotion. Maybe even the beginning of something that could become love. "Yes," he said. "I'm willing to try." And so they did. But Sarah made the terms crystal clear. This was probationary. This was conditional. If David reverted to old patterns, if he pulled away again, if he showed any sign that he wasn't fully committed to change, Sarah would walk. No second chances after this second chance. David moved back into the house in February 2020, into the guest room as Sarah had specified. In a strange way, the pandemic lockdowns helped them. With nowhere to go, they were forced to actually spend time together, to talk, to learn about each other. They started having real conversations. About their childhoods, their fears, their dreams, their regrets. They cooked together, watched movies, took walks around the neighborhood. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something that resembled a real relationship. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns would resurface. When David would start to withdraw, Sarah would call it out immediately. "You're doing it again," she'd say. "You're pulling away. Either talk to me or this ends." And David, to his credit, would stop. Would sit down. Would share what he was feeling, even when it was uncomfortable. Sarah maintained her autonomy throughout. She kept her own bank account. Made her own decisions. Reminded David regularly that she was choosing to stay, not trapped by obligation. This wasn't forgiveness out of weakness. This was Sarah setting the boundaries and watching to see if David could meet them. And something shifted. Not quickly, but slowly and steadily. David started to let his guard down. Started to share his emotions instead of hiding them. Started to be present in a way he never had been before. If you're still with us at this point, drop a comment below. We're about to come full circle to where this story began, and you need to hear what happened on that 6th anniversary. Which brings us back to where we started. June 2022. 6 years after their wedding. Sarah walked into their bedroom that morning expecting to have a quiet anniversary. Instead, she found David packing a suitcase. Sarah's heart dropped. After everything they had been through, was he leaving again? "David?" she said, her voice shaking. "What are you doing?" David turned around, and when he saw her face, he immediately realized how this looked. "Sarah, no," he said quickly. "This isn't what you think. I'm not leaving you." "Then what is this?" Sarah asked. David took a breath, and Sarah saw nervousness in his expression. "I'm packing for us. For a trip. I made reservations at a bed and breakfast on the Oregon coast. The same place where I proposed to you 6 years ago. I wanted to take you back there, to do something I should have done years ago." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. David closed the suitcase and walked over to her. He took her hands in his, and they were trembling. "Sarah," he said, 6 years ago, I proposed to you for all the wrong reasons. I was trying to prove something to someone who didn't matter. I wasn't thinking about you, about us, about building a real life together. And I've regretted that every day since I told you the truth. I can't go back and change what I did. I can't erase the hurt. But I can try to make it right. And I can tell you, with complete honesty, what I should have told you the first time." David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sarah's breath caught. "I'm not proposing again," David said quickly. "We're already married. But I want to give you something that represents the truth of how I feel now." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Not an engagement ring, but something simpler. A band with a single stone. "This is a promise," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "A promise that I will keep showing up. Keep being honest. Keep working to be the partner you deserve. Not because I'm trying to prove anything to anyone else, but because I love you. Actually love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life earning your trust." Sarah looked at the ring, then at David, and tears streamed down her face. "You love me?" she whispered. "Yes," David said, crying too. "I love you. I don't know exactly when it happened, maybe gradually over the past 2 years. But I love you, Sarah. Not the idea of you, not what you represent, but you. Your kindness, your strength, your willingness to give me a second chance when I didn't deserve it." Sarah threw her arms around him. "I love you too," she said. "God help me, I love you too." But even in that moment, even in the joy of that embrace, Sarah knew something David was still learning. Love wasn't enough. Actions mattered more than words. And she would continue to watch, continue to hold him accountable, continue to choose this marriage one day at a time. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to demand the truth and patient enough to see if change could be real. So what do we take away from Sarah and David's story? First, the truth always comes out. David thought he could maintain the deception indefinitely, but lies have weight, and eventually that weight becomes too heavy to carry. Second, people are more complex than we give them credit for. David was never a pure villain. He was a hurt person who made terrible choices because he hadn't dealt with his pain. Understanding why someone hurt us doesn't excuse the hurt, but it can help us move forward with clarity. Third, you don't have to accept the version of yourself that someone else's actions create. When Sarah found out David had never loved her, she could have internalized that as proof she was unlovable. Instead, she recognized that his inability to love her was about him, not her. That clarity gave her the power to make choices from strength. Fourth, healing is possible, but it requires brutal honesty from everyone involved. David and Sarah couldn't move forward until they both stopped hiding. Fifth, setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. Sarah didn't forgive easily. She set conditions. She maintained the power to leave. And that's what made the rebuilding possible. And finally, love isn't always what we think it is. Sarah and David's story shows us that love can grow in unexpected places, even in soil that seemed completely barren. That doesn't mean every broken relationship can be salvaged. Many can't and shouldn't be. But it means that transformation is possible when both people are willing to do the hard work. And here's the crucial part. Sarah never lost herself in this process. She didn't become smaller to make David's growth easier. She demanded that he rise to meet her, not the other way around. So let me ask you, because I want to know what you think. If you were in Sarah's position, if you discovered that your spouse had married you to prove a point, would you have given them a second chance? Or would you have walked away immediately? And here's a harder question. If you were David, would you have had the courage to tell the truth? Or would you have kept up the lie? And here's the real question. Did David deserve a second chance? Or did Sarah simply outgrow the betrayal? These aren't easy questions, and there are no right answers. But Sarah's story teaches us something important about the difference between giving up and giving in. She didn't give up on herself or her dignity. She didn't accept less than she deserved. But she also didn't give in to the easiest path, which would have been to walk away. She chose a third option. To demand honesty, to set boundaries, and to see if genuine change was possible. That kind of courage is rare. Most of us either stay too long in situations that hurt us, or we leave too quickly when things get difficult. Finding the balance, knowing when to fight and when to let go, that's one of life's hardest skills. If this story made you think, if it challenged you, leave a comment below. Have you ever discovered that a relationship wasn't what you thought it was? How did you handle it? And if you found value in this story, please share it. Because stories like this, difficult and messy but ultimately hopeful, these are the ones we need to hear. They remind us that life doesn't fit into neat categories, that people are capable of both terrible mistakes and genuine growth, and that sometimes the hardest path leads to real healing. Thank you for watching. And remember, the truth might hurt, but lies hurt more. Until next time.